Thank you, Gareth. And yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know 11 o'clock on the Friday is a bit of a tough one, but hopefully you've all had a strong coffee if you're out networking late into the night. And thank you, everyone, for joining us online as well. Great that you can join us for this session where we're going to be looking at the future of pesticide policy and moving pesticide policy into practice over the coming months and years. So I think there's been a lot of talk, certainly at conferences like this and previously, about the need to tackle pesticides from an environmental perspective. I think the environmental impacts of pesticides are well known, from the acute impacts of the highly hazardous and persistent chemicals through to the more diffuse impacts of chemicals which are used at a mass scale, and all the way through to the impacts of potentially unknown cocktail impacts of multiple different chemicals mixing in the environment. But I also think it's becoming increasingly clear that many farmers are looking at moving their farm systems away from a reliance on inputs, not just for the environmental impacts, but also from a farm resilience, a business resilience, and a profitability perspective as well. And I think resilience and profitability are two words I've certainly heard a lot over the last couple of days at this conference, and were indeed critical to the Secretary of State's speech yesterday when he was talking about the need for farms to operate as businesses and be resilient. So I think many farmers, including some excellent ones on the panel today, are already breaking away from those input-dominated systems and learning, finding out that that's working for their farm business and for the environment. But I don't think that is the case across the farm system, especially at the UK and globally. So just looking this morning and at the food security report, which was published just before Christmas, fungicide use globally has actually risen by 75% since 1990. So I think while the narrative around pesticide use has been a growing awareness and a growing, especially on policy, towards the need to do that, what we're actually seeing on the ground is a little bit different. So, talking about that growing awareness, the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was signed in Montreal a couple of years ago, set an ambitious target to reduce the risk of pesticide use by half by 2030. And obviously, we're now only 5 years from 2030, and I think that target's looking quite difficult. So, are those policies transitioning into practice? Are farmers being supported with the tools and the finances they need to move in that direction? And these are some of the questions we're going to explore in the session today. So I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel. We've got Denise Walton, who farms up in Scotland, and we've got Patrick Barker, a farmer in Suffolk, and Nick Mole, Policy Manager at Pesticide Action Network UK. So what we're going to do is just go through each of the panelists, and they're going to tell you a bit more about the work they do and how that impacts the transition from pesticide policy to practice, and then I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll come to the audience as well. I think we're quite keen for this to be a very engaged session, so please do have your questions ready, and we want it to be quite conversational as well, as Gareth set out at the start. So, so Denise, I'll pass over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to go straight into which is up there now. Obviously, as farmers, we focus both on the way we farm and our livestock, but we're also very influenced by what we see and hear and read in policy, in documents that we get. So this is one I received recently, and I was stunned by the impact of soil pollution from pesticides, and a lot will be from the insecticides that are administered to livestock for pest control. So that sort of sets the scene for what I hope the message I can give to you today, but also on our farming. Next. That just gives you a very quick overview. That's the sort of land that we're farming. The red circle is the steading where the farm yard is. So you can see it's quite a mixture of habitats. We've been organic since 2007. We've been Pasture for Life certified completely in our farm since 2018. So we run a farm that's very low input, but we have evolved from a conventional mixed farming system to where we are now. And what has driven a lot of what we do is not just the ecological environmental principle of farming in a much better way, but also the lowering costs. Thank you. So this is cattle this year fattening on tall herb. So this is our approach to pesticide management is obviously always to reduce pesticides. And I would say over the last 10 years, we've probably gone down to, a 0.1% of the pesticides on our livestock that we used to use. So it's very, very small. But one of the ways, that very importantly, 90% of managing for pesticides and all livestock management are issues of stress and grazing management. So this is tall herb grazing, which means that our animals are not grazing close to the ground, they're not picking up soil-borne pesticides as pests and sort of gut pests. So tall herb grazing is really important. So these are our cattle grazing in the summertime. And then if you have a close look at the carpet on the right, it's absolutely hooching with life. And in fact, if you look closely, you can actually see a dung beetle. So dung beetles are a very important part of our approach. They are co-managers of our livestock. So all the insects, dung beetles in particular, in that cowpat are helping our livestock and helping us to control the pests of our livestock. So that's a very, very important indicator for us that actually our approach to pesticide management is reaping benefits. And there are other ecosystem benefits from what you can see in that lovely, lovely, delicious cowpat. Yum, yum. Sorry, it's not an obsession. Yes, it is an obsession. So this is my son Angus, who is basically implementing all the farm policy in relation to our livestock and our land management. And this is a deferred grass. So this is an area of the farm that we've left for 12 months to grow, to set seed, and to begin a senescence. So it's got a high carbon to nitrogen ratio, and this is for our winter grazing. A lot of biodiversity benefits. The more biodiversity that we can encourage, actually it works very well with pest management too. So that was in August. And so what you can see there is the regrowth that's coming from the base of the stalks of the senescing grasslands. So there's always grass. And then what that's representing is the high carbon-nitrogen ratio, which is important for winter grazing management. And it means that we can tall herb. Basically, it's a standing crop of hay with a high fiber, high dry matter content. So this was taken a week ago. Our fattening cattle on that same field, looking absolutely fabulous. That makes me very proud to see them. They haven't had 1 ounce of pesticide. There's been no need to manage gut parasites. So they are a pesticide, agrochemical-free livestock, and the beef from them is fantastic. And they're fattening perfectly well. We're keeping up with our KPIs of production. You know, we're doing our kilo a day, more or less, which confirms the ADHB on grass in spite of 000 inputs. But my son has worked a lot on the genetic, the phenotypic traits of the kind of livestock that can survive on an all-grass, all year round, outdoor, carving outdoor system. Sorry, dung again. If you look at the image, which will be on your left, if you can see the density of cowpats on that grass, it's every meter there is a cowpat. So what we're doing is, for the winter grazing in particular, we're moving our cattle really quickly, every 1 or 2 days. We do what's called rotational tall herb grazing or deferred grazing. We don't do tight mob grazing. But in the wintertime, it's tighter because we need to leave the cold to help us control any residual pests. Have a good close look. You can't really see it, but that cowpat indicates a high dry matter content, but it's also, although it was just taken a couple of weeks ago, is very alive with insect work, dung beetle work, though they're a little bit quiet at this time of year. So our dung is demonstrating that our cattle are being assisted, and we're being assisted by biodiversity, by nature, in terms of managing our pest burden. So this is also part of, managing pests is a holistic issue. So we've spent the last 2 or 3 years on the back of a Scottish Government Nature Restoration Fund grant, planting a lot of hedgerows, splitting our fields up into half the size. So 20-acre fields traditionally for Berwickshire, now 10-acre fields. So it means that we can rotate our livestock quicker. It means that we've got hedgerows, all of which help with the general health and condition of our farm. So just a few other things in relation to, I think that just shows one of the hedgerows just this last year. We've also, right now, so we don't, our cows get no pesticides whatsoever. Our calves only ever on the basis of FEC and possibly pepsinogen testing. So we only ever worm if we need to. But when we do worm, so for example, last year we had lungworm, we go in really heavy to avoid any resistance. So on the back of our animal health plan, which is part of our organic health plan with our vet, we will use possibly a pour-on, and if we have to have an ivermectin, it's only what's derogated from with our organic regulation, but we do a very heavy dosage. We've only had to do that once. But what we're also doing is we're keeping our calves on our cows longer. So rather than weaning in November, which is traditional for a suckler herd, we're weaning in February and early March. They're with their cattle for much longer. So you're reducing the stress. So stress and grazing management is key to integrated pest management control. But it's not that there's never, ever, ever, ever any pesticide. It's there when we absolutely have to use it. And had we not treated for lungworm, we would very definitely have had a very serious welfare issue on our hands. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Denise. That's brilliant. Patrick, do you want to tell us a bit about your farm system, which looks a little bit different?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Barker, and I'm a partner in our family farming business in Suffolk. We're farming 545 hectares of our own land, and we're doing about the same again in contracting for neighbours, and we also have a couple of environmental contracting projects where we look after other farms' stewardship schemes, and I've got one farm where is a whole farm environmental stewardship scheme which we manage for them as well. So for us, we're family, proper farming family. There's my father, my uncle, and my cousin and I all in the business, all with different ideas, different opinions, different ways of farming, different experiences. So for us, it's about balance, and I think the thing that I'll end up probably saying quite a lot today is the word balance. We have my cousin who is a proper farmer. He's a proper farmer. I sit here as a farmer, a conservationist, bookkeeper, property manager. I do all the stuff that he doesn't really want to pick up, which is how this works. When it comes to farming, we look at how we make decisions in quite a lot of detail, in that he makes a decision, the spray operator questions it, the agronomist questions it, I question it for cost and environmental point of view, and we go round and round in circles. The reason we do that is because the way that we're trying to farm. Now, we have a farm, we have 48 kilometres of hedgerow, we have 30 ponds, we have gone from a environmental stewardship and ELS, HLS scheme for 10 years into a countryside stewardship higher tier scheme, and we're now in our second higher tier scheme in a row. We're also running SFI options alongside that, and we are insecticide free in SFI. So our whole farming ethos has always been about how can we have a farm that is really productive, but also efficient. And that's productive in terms of output, crop output, but also productive in terms of biodiversity. And when I talk to groups a lot, I talk about yield. And I say, farmers love yield. What's your yield? I say, we don't worry about yield. We look at what is our margin. Are we actually making money? And then I say, but yield of wildlife is what really interests me. Great crested newts per pond, or yellowhammers per feeding area. That's the yield that I'm looking for. So what we started off by doing was, when we came into the business, we wanted to be able to put our own stamp on the farm, which was about 2007, just when the HLS schemes were being rolled out for the first time. We had one of the very first HLS schemes in Suffolk. We looked at our farm, and Brian and I just sat down and just said, look, what really annoys you about this farm? It's like, actually, it's driving round and round those telegraph poles. It's trying to get into those corners. Machines are getting bigger. We're actually making life hard for ourselves. And we were able to draw up a whole ELS HLS scheme at the time, which took all the land out of production that was just hard work. And we can call it marginal land, we can call it non-productive, land that we really can't generate a sensible return from. And what we ended up doing was there's one whole field right in the heart of the farm. We took it out of production completely to recreate a wildflower meadow with then all the funny corners, flowering strips. And we took the view with a really well put together scheme that what we wanted to do was we wanted to farm the farm as hard as we could, an intensive farm. We're going to farm in the middle and we're going to have wildlife around the edges. And that worked. It worked really well. But at the same time, Brian came back from college, came back from Writtle, and said, actually, what's really strange about this is that I don't know any of the neighbours. We don't talk about farming. So he got together a discussion group, and one Friday a month, we all got together in the farm office and just talked about farming and got to know each other. And this worked so well that it then literally morphed into the HDB Monitor Farm programme. And we became a monitor farm for the HDB. And that actually worked so well that Monitor Farm became Strategic Farm. And in that whole change of knowledge exchange, that idea of getting everyone together, the idea of costs, sharing costs, benchmarking, how do we reduce our costs, how do we reduce our inputs, all of a sudden became a whole HDB theme for 6 years of research. And our whole farm business developed as a result of hosting that. So we then hosted pretty much over 100 farmers for every single HDB meeting for open days with the themes of how low can you go? Can we grow crops with as little input as we possibly can, and looking at spring beans in particular with that. What is the best use of land? Excuse me. What is the best use of land? Where should we actually be growing crops? Where shouldn't we be growing crops? Where should we be looking at flowers or whatever else is available to us on the ground? Then we also looked at the benefits of overwinter cover crops and found that overwinter cover crops were really there. They were coming in as it was a bit of a fashion, and people were kind of looking at it and said, right, let's do some work. Let's really bore down into the detail of this. And Essex and Suffolk Water paid for water sampling behind overwinter cover crops. So looking at the quality of water that was coming out of field drains behind overwinter cover crops. And it's a whole presentation in itself. But to try and summarise it in a sentence, land that was left over winter on a plough or as a stubble, the residual nitrates, the nitrates in the water were through the roof, and behind an overwinter cover crop were largely non-existent. And all of a sudden the water company said, this is amazing, it's costing us £11 billion a year to remove nitrates. And then it turned out they can't even remove nitrates from drinking water, they just have to blend it backward and forward until it's down to a level that is safe for people to drink. So just think about that, they're bringing it down to the point you're allowed to drink it. And I think that is 50 parts per billion or 50 milligrams per litre. And actually what we found with the overwinter cover crops in this study was that the nitrate was down to 2 or 3 parts per billion. It was like, we're doing the work with a cover crop that the water companies actually can't do. And all of a sudden it became policy. And a few people have a different opinion on where overwinter cover crop. I spoke at an event with Jonathan Marsden recently from DEFRA, and he said, oh, well, we would soil health drove this. I was like, no, we drove this. So our claim to fame very much is that this research brought cover crops in for everyone as a funded option through private schemes by water companies, but also in ELMS and in land management schemes as well. And that was an accidental benefit, as an accidental find that we found, because we were actually looking at soil health, and soil health was the driver. We also looked at integrated pest management, and we looked at the benefits of having flowering margins around arable fields. And this was pitched by the HDB, and it was like, actually, yes, there's something we can really get stuck into. We're going to learn how we can quantify the benefits of flowering margins, how we can look at how many parasitic wasps do we need if we've got an aphid outbreak. And we sat down with the HDB, and they were like, right, what do you think? And I was like, I was hoping you were going to give me the answers to this. So what we actually did was we just learned how to farm more sympathetically by building habitat and flowering margins. It suddenly dawned on me that we're creating a whole farming system. We're not just saying, here's a crop of spring beans. We want to create a place where all our hoverflies, our parasitic wasps, our lacewings are all going to be. It's like, this is landscape. This isn't field. And that's kind of developed the whole IPM interest for me, and looking at where we kind of get this from. So the HDB work took us right the way through for 10 years in kind of learning how to farm better. And in that time, very early, Brian kind of sat the family down, in that kind of worrying way, when he said, I've got something to say to everyone. He said, we can do this a better way. We're ploughing a lot. We're turning over 3 million tonnes of soil a year on 500 hectares. We need to look at this differently. And the HDB are going to fund the work to look at this, and on it went. And now it sounds a bit daft saying that we ploughed pretty much the whole farm every year, but 10 years ago, we weren't probably thinking as clearly as what we are now with those objectives. And then it becomes regen ag, and it becomes Mintel, and it becomes all those things that actually we all talk about as if it's perfectly normal now. But that was a massive change at the time. You could see the senior generation who have always farmed one way say, what do you mean we're not going to plough? What are we going to do? And we went through that learning, but with the HDB behind us and all the other farmers in the area looking at what we were doing, well, we're not going to try this, but we're going to watch those Barker boys because they're the ones who are brave enough to try it. Actually, it was, okay, what do you think? What do you think of this? And farmers would stand in our yard and say, this won't work, that tractor won't pull that drill if you haven't ploughed this. And all that information then became one massive knowledge exchange program. And for me, the strength of everything we've done is how everyone was engaged. And all the farmers in the area, pretty much around us in Suffolk, everyone is relatively similar, or proportionally similar, in that everyone's about 1,000 acres, they've got one combine, 2 tractors, a sprayer, 2 men and a teleporter, which is a subsidy hangover, BPS hangover, that no one's actually had to think about doing anything differently. But everyone was trying to farm the same way. So we grow winter wheat, we grow winter or spring barley, depending on how the rotation falls. We grow oilseed rape, which I'm sure we'll come on to a bit later on, spring beans and ryegrass. So we're fairly typical. We don't grow sugar beet, which a lot of the neighbours do, but we're fairly typical for the area. And when I'm thinking about our role with pesticides and with this type of discussion, last year I did a panel on IPM, and we were looking at IPM, and Sarah Langford from the crowd said, everything you do, all this IPM, all this, why aren't you organic? And it kind of stopped me in my tracks a little bit, and I thought about that. And actually, the HDB work we've done, we're also a leaf demonstration farm. We have farmers looking at us and talking to us all the time about what we're doing. And my answer to her is then, still as it is now, is actually we're trying to find a way that works for everyone. So we don't want to be organic because we want to look at that mass market. Our produce, our wheat, our barley, we're selling it to Frontier, to Coupe, to Facitra, it's going on lorries, and then it disappears. We don't always know where it goes. But it's hitting the food chain. Previously, I'd have said to people, someone said to me, the stuff that you grow on your farm, where does it go? And I was like, it goes on a lorry, I've got no idea where it goes. But actually, some of the work we've been doing, which we'll touch on in the questions, has really honed in that we now know that the wheat we grow goes to Frontier, and it goes to Nestle, and it goes into shredded wheat. I know the oilseed rape we're growing is going to PepsiCo because it goes into Walkers, and they're frying potatoes with it. So in learning about how we do things better, we've actually started to work out where things go as well, and that's built our conversations with our supply chains. But for us, the driver has always been, how do we farm the farm better? Do we create a whole farm ecosystem that benefits everything? And how do we just reduce costs? And we look at it from a business point of view first.
Brilliant. Thanks, Patrick. There's loads there that I think we're going to dig into in the questions, and I've certainly got a few. But before we do that, Nick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm Nick Mould, Policy Manager from the Pesticide Action Network UK. It's my 18th year working on pesticide issues, and we're sort of here to talk about policy, but also the practice, but I will talk about the policy side of things. And I would argue that we don't have one in the UK. I would argue that there have been decades of ignoring pesticides as an issue from a succession of governments. It's probably too early to say that that's going to happen with this government, but I'm not overly optimistic. And I think, it's really heartening. It's always heartening to be at RFC anyway, to see all of these farmers who are doing great things and to hear what we've just heard here. And I will happily acknowledge that in the 18 years that I've been involved in this, there has been a bit of a sea change in terms of farmers' attitudes to it. But a lot of it is them doing it by themselves, on their own, because they realise that that's the best thing to do, that's the best way to farm, that is sort of the most profitable way to farm, and it helps biodiversity. But what there is a lack of, a complete lack of, is any kind of vision or leadership from the top, from DEFRA, from the government. So we've had a lot of fine words over the years. We've had the 25-year environment plan. I don't know if any of you were here to hear Michael Gove talk, the only minister who's ever come to RFC, to talk about how important it was, how we're going to reverse biodiversity. Well, pesticides were mentioned in that. There's been nothing on it. We've been promised a national action plan on pesticides, the how and where we use pesticides. That's now, I think, is it 8 years late? something like that, 8 years late, so that's not there. Yes, we've had the payments for not using insecticides, but insecticide use was falling anyway. But there's nothing about fungicide use, which is rising incredibly, which presents its own dangers, not just to the environment, but also to human health, which again, I think is an area that is sadly neglected. The health outcomes of pesticide use, not just for the public, but for those who are working with them and living with them, that's ignored. We've raised this many times with various health ministers who then say, well, pesticides are a farming issue, they're not a health issue. Go and talk to DEFRA. So I think another thing, I know organic farming is great, not for everyone, and I think that was very well put out by Patrick here. But there's no support for organic. Where is that? I think we've got the lowest percentage of organic agricultural land certainly in Europe. And where's the support for that? So what we're lacking is vision, what we're lacking is leadership, what we're lacking is any kind of direction for people to follow. And farmers are being left to do it on their own, or they're being blamed for the pollution and the losses that are happening. And I mean, those losses are carrying on. We again, fine words about reversing biodiversity loss, halting it and reversing it. But we're still losing farmland bird species. We're still losing insect abundance. We're still having our rivers and aquatic ecosystems polluted by pesticides. And frankly, nothing's being done. And I'm not hearing anything really coming from Steve Reed about this now. So I hope it's not going to be the same old, but what we need is clear vision, something to take us forward, but something that's going to help farmers to reduce their inputs, farm more sustainably, more resiliently, but I think also the bottom line is improve their incomes. And I think you made a really interesting point about yield, and yield being the marker of success. I think farm income should be the marker of success and not this chasing yields, because that just leads to more and more inputs that we probably don't need. So yeah, I think I'm going to be a lot briefer in my presentation. We need leadership. It's not there. And I'd be really interested to hear actually what kind of support from our government that farmers would like and would welcome to improve their lot, but also more widely to improve the environment for everyone and our food security as well. I think that's an important issue which is undermined by pesticide use as well. So there's an awful lot of issues which I'm sure we're going to go into, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that leadership and the National Action Plan as well, we can probably delve into that in a bit of detail as well. But I did want to pick up on that, because that's a point I was going to raise as well. I think listening to Denise and Patrick, you speak, I think a lot of the work you've done feels like it's been driven by you and your farm, and rather than policy to practice, it's been practice going ahead and policy running to catch up. But if you were going to be starting your journey now, today, on the journey you've discussed going on there, do you think there is more support for you now to help you get on that journey, or is it still missing?
I think the colleges and the universities have got quite a bit of catching up to do. I think the people coming out of agriculture degrees aren't quite probably as up to date as they should be. I think if you're a farmer looking to change the system, I think it's very hard. I think if you want to go out and find that information, you have to actually work really hard to do it. And we were so fortunate that for us, the HDB project was on our own farm. If it was a neighbour, if it was nearby, we'd have been there like a shot and supporting it. Since our programme finished, our HDB monitor farms are now and I haven't been to a meeting since. So I think if you want to change your farming system, you really have to look and work hard to find how you do that. And it's all about good advice, really. We look at SFI, we look at countryside stewardship, ELMS, as it all is at the moment. It's all there set up to help people farm better, but it's really not as easy as just doing it. We've lost all our advice. When we went into our first schemes, we had a Natural England advisor on the end of the phone. We could ring them up and say, look, I've got a problem. I don't know what to do. Now, if I want to speak to a Natural England advisor, I have to go around the houses, and I still generally don't really get the answer I'm looking for. Actually, I need that advice. I need that person to talk to. So someone who's coming at it fresh, I have an absolute massive amount of sympathy because it is hard at a time when there isn't the margins really to get it wrong. And the fear of failure is also something that comes into this massive part as well.
Yeah, And I suppose, Denise, farming up in Scotland, you fall outside of kind of the elm support here in England. If you were starting this journey today, do you feel there is more support for you to transition to the kind of farming you're running now?
Not at all. There isn't support at all, and principally because it's livestock management. Obviously, we engage with our vet when we need to, but the vets aren't giving any advice. And actually, the vets that work with us are absolutely astonished that we're managing, the visible kind of health, key performance indicators and the growth rates with a farming system that we've developed through our own initiatives. But I mean, certainly, looking back, certainly going organic, the organic advisors helped us. But we were of a mind in any event. I suppose, we have an advantage. My background is as an ecologist, so I came into farming when we were new entrant smallholders way back, that we were going to do this as much as we possibly could. But what directed us more than anything is direct selling is what our market was also expecting, was that we would be low input. But if we were coming to it first, I know that I farm with my son and my husband, the first thing we would look at would be cost. But there is no support or advice about how we do that, and the vets don't help. We're teaching the vets, actually.
And I think that, because you talked about the system you're using with tool hub grazing and moving towards that approach, and Patrick, you talked about minimum tillage, and these are all system changes, aren't they? These are moving your farm to a different system. And I think for a lot of farmers that can be very scary. It's not a silver bullet approach. It's not a silver bullet solution. You can't just subtract and substitute the pesticide you're using with a better option often. But the support for that goes beyond SFI, doesn't it? It goes into the wider system, the kind of advice which is available, and the supply chain support. And I know, Patrick, this is something you touched on a little bit in terms of what you were saying from the supply chain perspective. And if the support isn't there necessarily from government policies, are there kind of private initiatives and changes which are helping you on that journey?
Yeah, to a certain extent. One of the things that frustrates me the most is actually people just doing the same thing year after year, because that's what we do. Let's change it, let's challenge it, let's actually look at what's going wrong and can we find a solution. What we've been able to do in the east of England, we're very fortunate that we have a programme called LENS, which is now in its 5th year, which is Landscape Enterprise Networks, which is a lot of private funders have come together, which is Nestle, Purina, PepsiCo, British Sugar, Anglian Water, and a number of other ones who are in the east, but a bit that I don't deal with directly, who actually are trying to get ahead of this. They've said, right, well, farmers, tell us what you want. Tell us how we can help you improve the produce that's coming off your farms. How can you farm more resiliently? How can we, as big, some of the biggest food and drink companies in the world, how can we buy produce from you guys that is farmed better, is more sustainable, and we can start to hit our corporate targets of sustainable produce and everything else that they're all working towards. And that's something that we're looking at the moment, we're developing. I'm working closely with Nestle and PepsiCo especially, just say, look, you can do this, fund this, and we will deliver this for you. Tell us what you want in terms of a carbon footprint point of view, and let's work out how it works. And a really good example of that is I sat down with, the whole of Lens was created by 3 Keel, and I sat down with Tom Curtis, who's the boss of 3 Keel. And he said to me, great news, PepsiCo are joining Lens. And I thought, what on earth is PepsiCo's interest in Lens? Is it sugar? He said, no, they've lost their market for sunflower oil from Ukraine. They own Walkers. I was like, really? It shows what I know. He said, actually, they need to be frying potatoes to make crisps, and no one in the world's going to be happy if Walkers don't get enough rapeseed oil because no one has any crisps. And it's like all of a sudden then there would be a problem. So I said, have they got any idea actually how difficult it is for us to grow oilseed rape? Oilseed rape area over the UK has just absolutely plummeted. Loss of neonics, everything in terms of growing and actual farming skills has just made growing oilseed rape hard. And he said, actually, I don't know, let's talk to them. So we've been able to put some meetings together and some workshops together, getting people from PepsiCo in the sustainability team actually talking to farmers, and farmers saying, this is hard, but I want to grow it because I want to grow a good break crop. PepsiCo saying, what do you need from us? The farmer, and ideas going backward and forward, and actually starting to work with the supply chains. And it sounds really obvious. It sounds like something that you think, I'll be doing it all the time. But before I was involved in Lens, people would say to me, if I said this already, people say to me, well, the produce on your farm, where does it go? And I'm like, wow, we grow it, we combine it, we put it in the shed, we sell it to the person who's paying the most amount of money, and we put it on a lorry, and it disappears. And it was like, that was it. It's like, well, what happens to it? I was like, I've got no idea at all. It just leaves the farm. We wave it off. Our involvement with Lens and now talking to the supply chains actually means that I know where, I know the wheat goes. If it goes to Frontier, it goes to Nestle, goes into shredded wheat and shreddies. I know where these things go now, and actually we can talk to those people. We're growing spring barley. If we can hit the spec for malting, which we can do most years, it goes to Muntons, and Muntons are selling it to Suntory and Serene and the brands that we all know. But actually, I know now that that's our malt, so I can talk to any of those people and go, actually, what do you want from us as a grower? Why don't you help us? I said, if we can have a flowering margin funded next to your crop, what you pay for that, and we'll grow this for you. And these conversations are all happening, but this is really early days, and we're the ones who are driving this because we're looking at it from a business point of view and thinking, well, how do we add value to that? No supply chain partner is saying to us, you must do this, otherwise we won't grow it, or do this and we'll pay you a premium, because we know perfectly well they can go to the farm next door where they're still ploughing pretty much, sometimes they're taking the tarmac off the road, they're ploughing so close to it, that they can go there and buy the same produce for the same price. It pretty much goes on the same lorry to the same place. So for me, it's like, how do we actually quantify the good that we do? I know we do good. I spend half my life walking around the farm with binoculars and a notebook. And what I don't recall myself, I get projects funded, I get people coming on the farm, and actually we know what we've got on our farm. We know how many different bird species we've got. I know how many barn owls I've got nesting because I monitor every single nest and bring the chicks. I know we've got 52 species of bee on the farm. So I can tell that story to all these budgets and I say, this is what we can do and we can deliver. But help us to help you to actually deliver it in a way that is better. And let's start to look at how we reward the people doing good.
Yeah. Can I just make a comparison from a livestock point of view? So from livestock, if we didn't direct sell our livestock, there is no equivalent of a supply chain purchasing power to buy livestock or milk or cheese that can actually, and I know David's in the audience and who could contribute, I'm sure, to this, David Finley, that has that kind of influence. So unless we didn't sell direct, and we're selling direct because our market wants us to be organic, but it's a relatively small market, there is no large-scale influence on the market to influence the way we farm as livestock farmers, and not least, our neighbours are resistant to what we're doing. So at a recent discussion group that I contributed to, the resistance to what we were doing was palpable. But okay, there are a few people coming in on this, but, it's a long journey, and it's slightly different for livestock than for arable. But the arable example is setting a super example, actually, for what we need to do a lot more, actually speak to our neighbours.
Brilliant. And I think, that number you raised earlier, Patrick, 11 billion in terms of the value of to the water companies of that kind of water thing. The support is out there, and I think 11 billion looks like a huge number, especially in the context of the conversations around the farming budget in the autumn and kind of whether that was enough, whether the support is there. So I think looking to mobilise some of that finance to support the work you're doing at scale, a lot of farms is going to be important. Just before we come to the audience, I think just picking up on, Nick, the point you raised around kind of current government is about greater realignment and actually look how that can facilitate trade. But what is happening with UK alignment and divergence?
Yeah, I just sort of go back to before we move on to that, just that previous point. I think lack of leadership. I mean, yes, we've got PepsiCo. We work with some of the big retailers as well who are actually making some quite bold moves in phasing out some of the most highly hazardous pesticides from their global supply chains and helping their suppliers to change the way they work, which is laudable, but again, this is something that should be coming from our elected officials, who are, in theory at least, supposed to be looking after our health and welfare. But so there is some help out there, but it's leadership that's not coming from the right place. So divergence, great, yeah. So as I say, pesticides have been ignored for decades. That has been, I think, exacerbated by us leaving the EU. Whilst the EU pesticide regime is far from perfect, it was probably the best example in the world, and we as members had to follow that. Since leaving, we have drifted in a number of areas. I mean, in the first place, we don't actually have a regulatory system that is functioning in any sense. We don't have the capacity to approve, monitor, regulate active substances. So what that's resulted in is the HSE arbitrarily extending the approval for active substances because they don't have the capacity to review them. So we're seeing things that will now have been approved for 20 years. Things that have gone out of use in the EU for environmental, human health reasons, or just because they weren't renewed. So we're seeing a real change in what's here. And that isn't, I don't think, anything sinister in that. That's all about a lack of capacity and a lack of ability to actually do anything. So we're falling out of alignment in terms of what pesticides, active substances are permitted. On food residues, this is a bit more active. There has been a move over the last 3 years to lower maximum residue levels for a number of active substance produce combinations to bring them in line with the Codex Alimentarius, which is sort of aimed at facilitating trade and easing our trade deals going forward. But the worrying thing about that is what has happened is where the Codex MRL is lower, weaker, we've aligned with that. Where it's stronger and ours is weaker, we've maintained ours. So across the board, it's been a lowering of standards. So there's that. So yeah, we are diverging. We're diverging from the EU. We've got issues with trade deals. I think particularly problematic is the upcoming negotiations with India. India has a long track record of trying to put pressure on, certainly on the EU and other sort of countries that it exports to weaken their pesticide regulations to import food. The UK on its own probably hasn't had the power to stand up to that lobbying, so that's a very worrying trend. UK-US trade deal could be even worse in terms of that. I mean, we'll see how far down the line that goes if it does. But what this divergence, I think, is also doing is weakening our position with the EU. So the idea that the EU will be happy to do a trade deal whilst we have weakened pesticide legislation, we've moved away from theirs, but also on a lot of other environmental issues, there has been divergence. The EU is going to insist on dynamic alignment, and if we don't do that, we're not going to get a trade deal. But that then also undermines our ability to export produce to the EU, which is our main market and always will be, regardless of how many trade deals we do with India. We're not going to be starting to sell apples back to India or any of that kind of thing. So this divergence is very, very worrying for a number of reasons. It undermines our ability to trade properly. It also undermines, I think, it will probably undermine our farmers as well, to be able to compete on a level playing field. So there's a lot going on, a lot needs to be looked at. And the solution actually is really simple. Let's just do what the EU does. That would answer the lack of capacity questions. That would answer an awful lot of questions. I know it's a bit of a hot topic in certain areas about closer relations with the EU again, but that would be the simplest thing to do. That would maintain, all our standards, relatively high level, facilitate trade, deal with the lack of capacity, and it seems pretty simple. So, again, we'll see.
Simple solutions, brilliant. And Denise and Patrick, do you have any views on divergence or anything to do with how pesticide policy in the UK is interacting on an international level at all, from a farm perspective? Happy if not as well. I can move to the audience, that's all.
We do our own thing.
Yeah, you do your own thing. Yes.
Three of you in different ways. So, to the farmers among you, have you in any way quantified the changes in pesticide use specifically? As you've implemented some of the changes that you've been talking about, has there been a quantified reduction that you can point to? In terms of biodiversity, we do a lot of talking about what we see above ground biodiversity. We did talk about the dung beetles that spend some of their time underground. But in terms of soil microbiome, have you done any measurements and can you see any difference as there have been changes in pesticide uses? And the third question is about the elephant in the room. Nobody's mentioned the pesticide industry. What's their role in this? I mean, they're not going to disappear. They are trying to sell their products hard. They don't want farmers to stop using them. What's their role? How do you relate to them? How do they relate to you in these changes that are taking place?
Brilliant, thank you very much. Anybody want to take those questions first on the panel?
Yes, we can quantify pretty much everything because we have fairly diligent record keeping. The way I would describe it to a room is that the first year or two that we were going down a very different route of farming, the accountant turned around and said to us, "You're missing some stuff here. That your costs are much lower." And we went, "Yeah, that's because we're taking this on and we're doing it properly." And the same place he said, "And I think you must have missed a whole tank of fuel as well." And it's like, no, we're just using less. So yes, the numbers are to support that, but actually in reality, we're saving money. We're spending less time on a tractor seat, and we are just putting less produce through the farm. And we're talking about pesticides. The same can apply to fertilizer. We're using less fertilizer. Yes, less time on the seat, less fuel. The same probably applies to bad advice as well. We're learning more, so we're taking less bad advice and hopefully doing better advice. We have done quite a lot of worm surveys because part of the HTB work was working with Rothamsted, looking at earthworms and earthworms per spadeful. All of a sudden became a metric for success. But in terms of more detail in soil biology, that work, we haven't done that work in detail, but what we were able to do was pants. So Brian buried underpants, and if anyone ever saw it in the press, it got as far as the sun. Bumper harvest, it said in the sun. It came from Canada. I forget what the guy's name is. It'll come to me in a minute. Actually, just buried pants in the soil, cotton pants, and in all different fields. So land that was over plough, land that was in a spring crop, land that was behind a cover crop, and then just basically we put them all out on a washing line. And there's lots of detail and numbers and all that sort of stuff. But what we were able to do, and we did this for the executive board of Nestlé who came, put all these pairs of pants on a washing line from ones that you'd probably still be able to wear, be a bit uncomfortable, there's a few holes, but they were fairly much intact, all the way down to the cover crop in a no-till system. There was just the elastic band and a few strands hanging off it. And for me, the visuals are so much stronger message than actually those numbers, because all the farmers looked at that and went, "Good Lord." As simple as that. Because actually what we're trying to do is we're just trying to get people thinking. I'm not trying to sell the science to anyone. If anyone wants to know this, there's numbers galore. But actually, what do those farmers who come to our farm and look at the system take home? Wow, you should have seen those pants. Brian won't be wearing them. So yes, it does exist, but I think we have better ways of telling the story so that it gets through to people. What was the third bit of the question?
Pesticide industry.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about agronomists. No, we haven't mentioned agronomists in this at the moment. We challenge our agronomist, and it's easy. We could all sit here and say, agronomists should be doing more, agronomists should be doing this. But I kind of think of agronomists in the same bracket as farmers. We can talk about farmers should be doing this, farmers should be doing that. But actually, there's a person there as well. And for us, the agronomist, he makes a decision based on, I hope this spray recommendation isn't the one that gets me fired. There's a personal element to this as well. And actually, there's a lot of arse covering with agronomy. Actually, we as farmers have to be challenging our agronomists and saying, "Are you sure?" And he should be saying to us, "If you go out and do this now, you can cut that rate in half. If you do what you normally do, and while you're off to football tomorrow and you're taking the kids to hockey on Sunday, you might get around to doing this on Tuesday. I've upped the rate just to take that into account." Let's have really sensible conversations about what we're doing. And for us as farmers, our mindset should always be, do we need to do this? Do we really need to do this? It's a tool in the toolbox, not the first place to turn to. If pesticides to me should be a tool, not an insurance policy. I know farms. I know a farm where an agronomist walks the fields, he looks at everything, he puts a spray recommendation on the seat of the sprayer. The farmer turns up a day or two later and goes, "Oh, I better go and do that." It's like, that's not how to make effective decisions for your business. You have to be talking and you have to be taking responsibility. And one of the things I did a session this morning, actually talking about business opportunities of nature-friendly farming. And for me, part of that is that farmers going forward have got to be so much better at what they do, what we do. Our skills have to be so much honed in on how do we deliver the best. And that is looking at every single cost. Do we need that fertilizer? Do we need that spray application? Do we need any spray application? And the way we've looked at it is we're insecticide free. We saw the insecticide free option in SFI, £45 a hectare. I thought, well, for us, over 500 hectares, we can do the maths, about 20 grand. So how much needs to go wrong before that becomes a bad decision? It's like, well, we're not going to be putting it on wheat, we're not going to be putting it on barley, we're not putting it on grass seed, but actually, you know what? Where we have used insecticides in the past, we grew a crop of mustard for bird food, and we had a massive outbreak of sawfly larvae. Like, I've never seen plants just moving. It was like, yeah, this is going to happen and we don't like it. And I think we've used insecticide twice in 10 years. Actually, you know what? If we're taking insecticide-free payment and we lose a crop of mustard, it's like, well, we're quids in still. So it's a risk, but it's a calculated risk in terms of the way we run our business. But everything has to come back down to business. In terms of that's a very long answer to a very good question, very short question. In terms of the big chemical companies, actually, farmers, we do what we're told. You know, we follow. We're a bit sheep-like and we follow. But it doesn't mean we can't challenge the decisions that are being given to us as we get down to agronomist level.
Yeah. Just please, Nick.
Yeah, just quickly on your elephant in the room. Yeah, the pesticide industry. Yes, I think agronomic advice, and truly agronomic advice is an issue. It doesn't exist. But I think what's equally concerning is their infiltration of our research and university facilities. You know, Syngenta funding York to drive the research and the outcomes and the positions. And we've seen this for decades, the way they will undermine research to get them out. The same way the tobacco industry lobby to say smoking's good for you, and that sort of thing. I think that's something that really needs to be watched and reined in. And again, this is something that governments should be addressing. And I'll add another elephant to your pesticide industry, the National Farmers Union, and their approach and their opinion on pesticides, which frankly has been, it's been appalling. Ever since I've been working on this. And they really need to get their act together and stop being the political wing of the agrochemical industry and actually start supporting farmers, start having positive messages, start having a vision for how we can farm better rather than having elaborate campaigns to save our sprays and all this nonsense that they pump out regularly.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. In terms of, I think you raised a question about the microbiome as well, below the soil, and I know, Denise, this is something you're very passionate about.
Well, so just the first question is, we can retrospectively work out what the reduction has been over the last 20 or 30 years. Not least, we have a very rigorous whole-day audit with our organic certifier for the Soil Association, and we have to demonstrate every single year our invoices and quantities so that we are maintaining regulations. So that's a very helpful way. Yes, and so we can absolutely demonstrate that we've reduced use. So in terms of, we need to do an awful lot more auditing of biodiversity. I do what I can, when there's time. Time is a big issue. But certainly we know from cowpat activity that if our dung beetle is working, it means that below ground is working. So that's a very, very good indicator, much better than any soil scientist coming and having a look at our soils. The other thing is we don't have agronomists, we have vets. So the vets advising on what we should and shouldn't do. So as I said earlier, actually vets are learning more from us and we're learning from them. We had our cattle pregnancy diagnosed, so I'm talking specifically from a beef suckler enterprise as opposed to a dairy enterprise. But we had our cattle pregnancy diagnosed and really delighted to see that we had 100%, which is really good for a zero input system. And no worms, no fluke, no nothing. So the vet, again, was pretty astonished that there wasn't anything there for her to talk about. So, yeah, so we can demonstrate, the questions that you've asked. Thank you. Oh, yeah, actually we do underpants. Started doing underpants. We'll be doing more underpants. So it's called the Soil Your Undie campaign. And NFFN, which I'm Scottish chair, is actually running a campaign that we need to do a lot more on Soil Your Undie. So yes, we've started doing that quite successfully, actually.
Brilliant, I didn't see that, I didn't see it going that way. We'll take another question from the room, and I think we've got a couple online as well, do we? But another question, please, over there in the corner.
Hi there. It's probably mainly for Patrick, but have you seen PepsiCo make any changes since visiting yours and other farms? Thanks.
Thank you.
It's yes and no. They look at it from global agriculture, and something they roll out in the UK has to be applicable globally, which we have no control or understanding of. However it is. What we've been able to do, I think, is enable them to talk to farmers. And for me, that's the important thing. It's actually, there can be a blanket policy, or there can be a big statement. We want to source all our produce from regenerative sources by 2030 or 50% or whatever it is. But actually it's like, well, let's talk about this. Is that even a realistic thing to say out loud? And the best thing for me for PepsiCo is people in that sustainability and in that sustainable supply chain, they call it sustainable resource sourcing or something, is saying to farmers, what can we do to help you? What can we do to help you grow this product? And farmers saying, actually, you know what? If you fund companion cropping, we'll put it in with the oilseed rape. And just little things that hopefully make sustainable farming easier, which is, for farmers, is sharing the risk. Because actually at the moment, farmers on the ground, if you talk to farmers, if you said, what worries you? It's like, well, we choose varieties. We employ people, we buy machines, we pay for them. We put stuff in the ground, we assess the weather, we grow it, we spray it, we fertilize it, we do all the things that we think we need to do or don't need to do, or don't do. Then we get the combine out, we put it in the shed, then we sell it, and something's gone wrong and the lorry comes back. All that risk sits with us. So our number one question to all these is how can you help us share that risk? And that, when they're saying to us, what can we do? What they're really saying is, how can we share the risk with you? And that's where I then challenge the farmers in our groups to say, tell them what you want. You know, however daft an idea it is, let's try it. And if we think it's a stupid idea or a bit out there, let's ask them to fund a trial. And that's what we found with Lens and companion cropping and all these other things. You know, they're all things that actually PepsiCo have said, yes, we want to help you. We will fund this. You know, put an application in, let's do it. And actually, the biggest barrier for farmers is risk and their attitude to risk. And everyone goes, oh no, we're going to go with the safe option. So I just try something. And some of the HDB work that we did was challenging farmers' attitude to risk and getting them thinking about, well, how far are you prepared to push something just to learn what goes right and what goes wrong? And I think we're lucky because we've got farmers who genuinely think wider and want to do things better and appreciate that contact with the supply chain and the additional funding. But we're moving it also into time. There's a time where, you know, farm incomes are getting squeezed. You know, we're getting squeezed in a number of directions. The attitude to risk changes when the price of commodities is low because there just isn't the margin to get things wrong. So I've been really heartened by the attitude from the supply chains. And I spoke at one of the conferences in Amsterdam, the Coupe Alliance conference, and PepsiCo and Mars were talking about a collaboration they've been doing somewhere, which previously would have been unheard of as well. So I think genuinely in these companies, they all have regen ag managers, they have sustainable resourcing, all this type of stuff, and they want to do it right. Actually, they don't always know how to do it on a farm level. So actually, we have a bit of responsibility to help, as far as I can see, and to kind of do it better for everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, Patrick. Anybody else on the panel wanted to come back on the question around supply chains or PepsiCo or anything? But otherwise, I'll move in. Have we got a question online, do we?
Yeah, we've got a question from Abby from Glasgow. There needs to be more guidance on the remediation of land in this context. In your work with pesticides, are there any clear practice tools for communities trying to understand contamination and remediation?
Good question in terms of remediation. Does anyone on the panel want to take that? Nick, you're looking. You were frowning, so I'm going to come to you.
It's because I couldn't hear the question.
Oh,
I couldn't hear it properly, no.
Oh, sorry, could you repeat it, please?
Speakers point that way.
Yeah. Oh, go on then. I don't know if I can read it out either. I don't think my arms are long enough. Okay. Is this? Oh, this is the right one, is it? Oh, Abby from Glasgow. Yeah, okay. There needs to be more guidance on the remediation of land in this context. In your work with pesticides, are there any clear practice tools for communities trying to understand contamination and remediation? In which case, I think that's a question for perhaps you guys, particularly the organic. So, I guess the question is, if you're wanting to farm better and you've got contaminated soil, is there anything out there to help you decontaminate that soil? I'm not aware of anything currently that is there.
Well, number one, you need to know what's there before you can decontaminate. Number two, from my own experience and observation over the last 30 years of farming we farm, I do not believe that we have levels of contamination that need remediation. I'm not saying that our soils don't need managing, they absolutely do. Of course, we have to manage continually. For example, this isn't a pesticide issue, but I recently had basically soil tests done in some of the soils of some of our fields to look at the arbuscular fungal activity. And interestingly, the soils where we had our outdoor free-range lovely pigs, no arbuscular fungi. So that's not a pesticide issue, that is a soil management, land management issue in relation to how we manage and use livestock on our farm. So how are we remediating that? That's an issue that we have to address as farmers. But in terms of pesticide contamination, I don't really absolutely believe it's an issue with the way we farm. And as I say, you need to know what the level of contamination is before you can really remediate. And it is actually a holistic approach to farm management and restoration, of course. But there are a lot more issues there. I don't know.
So I think it does. It also then brings into the conversation the role of monitoring. And enforcement, etc. And obviously we've had issues with our rivers, shall we say, over the last couple of years, through lack of monitoring, lack of enforcement. And monitoring for pesticides in the environment is really not very comprehensive, particularly in soils and in aquatic systems. They're obviously the Environment Agency does some, but it's very lacking. We don't have, and again, this goes to a wider question about data and the use of data. We don't have accurate data about pesticide use on farms across the UK. We have very broad information about regional use. We certainly don't have it at farm level. We don't have it at catchment level. And therefore, the idea that we can make effective policies to remediate the harms done by pesticides without that data is, we can't. We're legislating in the dark, frankly, because we don't have access to accurate pesticide usage statistics and data.
Can I just quickly come back on just a thought I've had on
Yeah,
that? I mean,
please
obviously,
do.
the first slide I showed was the extent of pesticide damage to degraded soils, and that was horrific. And obviously, we do need to sort of address that. But also, we can spend a lot of time doing the research to demonstrate the facts and figures, and we know what's happened anyway. We actually just need to get on the basis of restoring and a better approach to farming and farm management and food production.
Yeah, and I think that monitoring point is key, not just for the impacts and kind of the outputs of what these systems are, but in order to support farmers to make decisions on their farm. I think both Patrick and Denise, you talked about using chemicals when you need to, and you're moving away from that prophylactic use, that kind of just using it because you always have and you always will, and using it in advance just in case. And we know that's been a massive driver of kind of high levels of pesticide use. But do you think that when it comes to forecasting or kind of having an idea of what the kind of the load of the risk coming in for that growing season is going to be, do you feel as farmers you've got enough data, or do you feel like there could be more there for you?
I think farmers in their decision making in their own farm office just need to take responsibility for making the best possible decision that they can do, taking into account every single factor. Now, there'll be people looking at it's a bit windy, I've got a lot of work ahead of me, maybe I need to get this on. That's not a reason for making a decision, I've got a lot of work on. Actually, we need to change the mindset a little bit in how do we do things right. And we do have, there is an element of monitoring. We get a quarterly newsletter from Essex Suffolk Water where they've been monitoring all the water quality. And previously there was big spikes of metaldehyde in the watercourses, and actually that we seem to have got on top of that. It's taken probably longer than it should have done, and longer than metaldehyde's been available to get on top of. But that has kind of given people the indication that actually, we can do this if we do things right. It wasn't that long ago that on our farm, my father put a pig unit in, and all of the grants enabled him to take the effluent from the pig unit and run it straight into the ditches. And then it was the 1970s, in 1990, he got a grant to turn them all back round the other way. So, we look at this like there's a perfect thing, but actually it's not that long ago that we didn't even realise the impact that we were having. So I think we do make great strides, but there's a lot of things that we can do a whole lot better. But actually, as I said before, it comes down to farmers taking responsibility for making good decisions, both from a business point of view and an environmental point of view, and doing it right, and actually just doing it, being a proper farmer.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, please, question in the audience. There's two. One lady over there and another one in the lady in the green jumper.
Thank you very much. I'm Deborah Crossan from Innovation for Agriculture, and I head up the Soils Department. My role is peer-to-peer learning and knowledge exchange. Yesterday, Steve Reed announced that the government will support the Adopt programme, purportedly to be 44 million. Both the farmers have mentioned lack of advice and also taking on the risk for farmers. How much do you think the panel believe this might help us drive forward change?
Brilliant, thank you. Either of you want to take that? Around the Adopt funding announced Secretary of State's speech yesterday, which I think was about taking the innovation and testing it into practice. So bridging that gap between innovation and technology and practice, and actually supporting farmers to bring that into their farming practices.
I think I've explained in a bit of detail the benefits that we've found from knowledge exchange, and I think probably everyone has got that. How much it's benefited us and how the farmers around us have benefited from it. Anything that filters down to farm offices to enable better decisions on the ground is very, very welcome. But my only thing with that is that when we've worked with NIAB, with ADAS, let's get this in a language that farmers understand as well. You know, you can put as many graphs and farmers will go, I forgot my glasses. You know, let's explain this in a way that farmers understand. Let's talk about business benefits. Any money that goes into helping better decisions is so welcome. Let's use it in a way, and let's make sure that we deliver it in a way that has real impact on the ground. Thanks,
Patrick. Denise, did you want to come in on that at all?
Yeah, just knowledge exchange certainly is excellent. I've been involved in some knowledge exchange projects, and it's probably the best way to actually transfer good knowledge farmer to farmer. But just one of the issues, for example, with fluke, which is a really serious pest of livestock, is that is evidently a climate change issue. When we first started farming on the east coast of Scotland 30 years ago, no fluke. We now have fluke as an endemic issue that has to be dealt with. So that is a much wider issue that as farmers we're having to deal with. But having forecasts that have leadership would help us. So we have a climate forecast that tells us in the early spring, look, we've got weather conditions coming in over the next 6 or 9 months, whatever, that you will find there's perhaps a peak of fluke that you can actually prepare for and deal with. And vets, like agronomists, need to get that same advice.
I don't know whether it will work. Time will tell. I think the big question is what the definition of innovation is. Is this going to be high-tech innovation that is not accessible to all farmers, particularly small farmers, because of the costs are prohibitive? Is it going to be just sticking plasters rather than addressing the actual underlying issues of things, which is what we often see? So I think the question is what kind of innovation is going to be there? And I think the only answer to that can really come from farmers. So if this is going to be, it needs to be farmer-led to address specific needs of farmers rather than top-down research being thrust on them, or high-tech shiny gadgets that they're not going to be able to afford anyway, or things that don't address the basic underlying problems of what is going on. So with those caveats, well, maybe it will.
Yeah. I think tech and innovation often gets kind of characterized as those silver bullet solutions, aren't they? Kind of high cost silver bullet. But I think what we've heard a lot about on this panel today is that journey towards moving away from pesticides and embedding it into resilient practice is actually about innovative thinking and innovative ways of working. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, you know, trying to repair soils, well, pesticide harms, well, the best way is not to get them in there in the first place. So the overarching goal should be to reduce and change the way pesticides are used, rather than then trying to fix the problem afterwards, as we know is not generally the best way to go about things. So, and again, this is where the government should show leadership. You know, what we'd like to see, I'm just going back to the undelivered National Action Plan, we'd like a clear goal of to reduce pesticide use and impacts by a certain date, so everybody can work towards that. And actually then innovation can be focused on reaching that goal. But without that kind of target, there's no direction of travel. So I think that would be a very top-line ask from from Steve Reed and this government.
So just while we're on the National Action Plan and that target, obviously the target to halve the risk of pesticides is something the UK has championed at an international level through the kind of Convention on Biodiversity Processes and the Global Biodiversity Metric. We are expecting the National Action Plan to be published this year.
I think you said that last year as well.
I know. I think I've said it in each of the last 5 years. But it's something we are expecting to be published, and within that, hopefully, some kind of direction around what that is going about. I mean, if we do get the National Action Plan this year, are you hopeful? Are you optimistic about it, or try and be optimistic, Nick?
No, I'm not. I am hopeful, but I'm not optimistic. I think they're two very different things. I mean, one of the things we were promised when we did leave the EU was that we can do things better. Now we're not shackled by the faceless bureaucrats in Brussels, and that hasn't materialised. The National Action Plan is actually an opportunity to do just that. You know, there could be some fairly simple but very far-reaching measures in it. However, we haven't really heard that there are going to be, and yes, my outlook is not great on it.
We'll probably leave it there then. I think there was another question.
Well, maybe we'll be back next year to say, well, we're expecting it any time now.
In the green jumper over there, please.
Thank you. Hello. I just wanted to say, wonderful hearing about your cattle, Denise, and what you've done to a large chunk of Suffolk, Patrick. Amazing. There was a question I had for Patrick, whether you're managing to avoid using glyphosate in your operations, or is it still part of your program? And that was a question. And then just to inform people, something I got from Pesticides Action Network online, that Mexico has banned glyphosate and GM. I thought, this is encouraging. It'd be rather good if we could follow.
Yeah, so thanks. I think glyphosate is a particularly interesting topic, isn't it? Do you want to come in on that, Patrick?
Yeah, we still use it fairly regularly. We grow ryegrass for seed, and after the second year, we spray it off with glyphosate and put wheat in the ground behind it. We use it pretty much whenever we want to kill a plant, effectively. And that is our main tool in the toolkit. If we weren't using glyphosate, what would we be doing? Ploughing, burying it deep, a few cultivations. For me, it's a bit of a trade-off. You know, we make sure that we use it correctly, as is laid out. And you know, if the senior generation from our farm were here, they'd be sitting here saying, we can't farm without it. We can't farm without it. And we look at it and think, well, you know, we use it because we have it. If it wasn't there, we would find something else. We'd have to find another way. But it's there because it works.
It's presumably on your farm, you've talked a lot about how you think very carefully from an environmental perspective about every decision you make. So presumably you're using glyphosate because the alternative would be worse, in your opinion, on the farm.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to grow crops at profit. You know, it sounds shameless. You know, ultimately that's what we're trying to do. And if we can do one dose of glyphosate, then we've got a stale seed bed and off we go. You know, we use the tools available to us. We use them correctly. And until anything changes, I imagine that's what we will continue to do. But there are places where we shouldn't be using glyphosate at all. You know, anything that's going into the food chain, it shouldn't be going on food that's going into the food chain. You know, and that still happens in some places. You know, but that's farm office decision making, as I talked about earlier. You know, people are itching to get on and combine. Oh, it's only a day. It's like, you know, let's think about this. And actually, that's where, you know, probably we need sensible grown-up discussions about, well, how should we be using these things and how should we not? What can we do that's wrong? You know, I'm talking about us as a farm, but also trying to think wider in that kind of, you know, UK ag, PLC, cereal growers. Actually, you know, we generally do what we're told, and whilst a lot of people won't like that, that's the kind of the playing field that's laid out in front of us at the moment.
Yeah, so I suppose from a policy perspective on glyphosate, Nick, do you want to come in on that? I know the.
Yeah, I mean, glyphosate's interesting, and the reason it's so high profile and problematic is because of overuse and irresponsible use, and it being used where it shouldn't be. So pre-harvest desiccation is a good example. It's now banned under the approval in the EU. The use in our towns and cities. For example, is completely unnecessary. That could stop tomorrow. Being on sale to the public. The public don't need glyphosate in their gardens. But you make a good point that people will use it because it's there, and people will find different ways to. So again, having these things with unrestricted use stifles innovation, good innovation, because it's there, it's legal, you can use it, so people will use it. And all the time we have these, and actually I think another good example is this, which I know something that you're interested in, is emergency derogations for neonicotinoids. All the time they're being granted, you're stifling innovation, you're relying on that, and that's just then a tool. The emergency derogation becomes an ongoing tool, which doesn't, again, address the underlying problem. So there are issues with glyphosate, and it would be nice to be weaned off it. And we're going to have, I think, some very interesting discussions this year in the lead up to December, when we discuss about the reapproval in the UK, what, if any, restrictions are we put on its use. So yeah, it's going to be a fun year.
Yeah, it is going to be a big year for glyphosate. Just while we're on glyphosate, obviously, because you mentioned at the start, Nick, when you were speaking about the join up between health and pesticides, and obviously quite a lot of the narrative coming out around glyphosate is driven by some of the legal cases coming out of America and elsewhere about some of the claims around the health impacts of using glyphosate. But you don't have to comment about that if you don't want to. But because you made that point earlier, I thought.
Yeah, no, happy to. I think this goes back to the very first question about the influence of the pesticide industry and how they. I'm going to say how they lie about things, how they hide information, how they subsume research. Glyphosate causes birth defects. That was known many, many years ago. Glyphosate as a carcinogen was known in the 70s. All of these were hidden by the pesticide industry. Glyphosate causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, the links are very clear in those court cases in the US, and now some developing in Canada and in Europe have shown very clearly that that's the case. And this is for people using it on a daily basis. And which I think brings, again, at the point I made earlier, that pesticides and health are completely ignored in this country. They're not in France. They're looked at as occupational hazards. The health department makes decisions about pesticide use in France as well. We don't here. There's no linkage whatsoever. And, the people that are most at risk from pesticide poisoning are those that are working with it. So it is farmers, it's farm workers, it's the agricultural sprayers, etc. They're the people that are most at risk. We don't have anything to do that. We don't have a functioning monitoring program. We don't have a functioning incident reporting system for the public or anyone else to report pesticide exposure. So that is the real, that's the bit that's been neglected, and that's something I would really like to see taken on again. We would like the Department of Health to take this under their remit, and I think it's important to understand that these aren't just environmental decisions. These are human health related decisions as well.
Can I?
Yeah,
I'm reminded of a farmers' meeting I went to, similar to this, but the other way around, where the speaker put up 3 newspaper cuttings from a period of time. I think, someone correct me if I'm wrong, Brighton City Council banning glyphosate. Then however long later, Brighton City Council asking for volunteers to pull weeds in the city. And after that, Brighton City Council to reintroduce glyphosate use. And all the farmers were sitting there chuckling, thinking this is the same problem we have. This type of conversation, give us the alternatives. Let's find the alternatives. Let's use that. Use the research. Let's do it right. Don't expect people to do something because it sounds right. Actually, it comes down to the economics of this, and it's wider than just farming as well.
I talk directly to that because our office is in Brighton, and the reason it went wrong in Brighton, and I'm going to be arrogant about this, but they didn't listen to me, and they didn't go. It's true, but they didn't develop a plan. They went for it overnight, and it failed. And I told them that's what was going to happen. But the alternatives are there, and if you phase it out over time, as many other places have done, including every town and city in France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Denmark, Bulgaria. It can and does work because the alternatives are there. But if, you know, and actually I think that's a good point. Without proper planning, you are going to fail, whether it's in agriculture or whether it's in the amenity sector. And it needs to be thought out and done properly and phased out. And you need to get your head round what the alternatives are, what the new methods are, and change your thinking. And then it will work. But yeah, doing it overnight is doomed to failure, and I told them that, and we'll continue to tell them that.
And it's also interesting how the same story can be spun out in many ways as well, isn't it? And, you know, these are divisive issues, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's interesting as well. I said, we've had so many complaints about weeds. And I said, we've had 60 complaints about weeds from 3 people.
Just on that planning point, and that kind of making sure it's a sustained, multi-annual kind of thought through strategy in terms of going that approach. Patrick, you mentioned you're in the SFI, the Sustainable Farming Incentive in England. You're in the insecticide-free option, and presumably you're also in the Integrated Pest Management Plan option itself. In your opinion, how are those specific support schemes supporting farmers across England to move away from pesticide use? Because there has been some criticism of the IPM plan in particular, that it's paying for a plan, it's not paying for actions, it's not paying for outcomes, and you're linked there. But I mean, having a plan obviously is critical in terms of going on that approach. What's your view on the SFI, and is there enough support, and is it the right support?
I think the SFI and the plans that are in place are a brilliant step in the right direction. And if we try and do too much too quickly, ultimately we don't really get anywhere. I remember ELS, HLS, which farmers went into in a big way. 70% of farmland in the UK was in ELS when it came out. So we're talking about 2006 to 2010, around that sort of time. I went to the State of Nature report launch in 2016, and the whole panel was saying ELS, HLS hasn't worked. And I remember coming away from that thinking that this is just the type of thing that, as an industry, we don't need. We should be saying that this has got us to a point where we should now be building on it. But all the panelists on that day, I think Gary, you're probably there on that for that one as well. You know, we're saying this hasn't worked, and the farmers are going, "Oh, what was the point in doing that then?" Actually, it was just a foundation to then go and build on, and it didn't get taken on. Now we're in a position where farmers are going, we can be insecticide free. Okay, we've got an IPM plan. I can see how this works. If we're building our habitats for natural predators, we can build on this and build on this and build on this. And I think we just have to be a bit more patient. And I know the farming side will probably think that that's a bit extreme and we don't want to change things. And the environmental side are thinking, what's he talking about? We're not moving fast enough. But actually, we have to think about all the other factors that come into decision making. And if we can get people just thinking about change and actually moving in the right direction, it's about kicking on and taking advantage of it, rather than just constantly going back to the start again, which seems to be what we do.
Can I just pop in quickly?
Please do.
On that? Yeah. I think this really beautifully demonstrates the need for transitional support as we change. And that transitional support from government can only come with proper planning. So pushing governments in all the devolved nations to support the rightful transition to an agroecological approach we all know can happen, and it can be economic. But farmers need support. It takes between 5 and 10 years to move from a high input system to an agroecological system. And we absolutely have got to have support for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's certainly something that NFFN is, and I know you are as well, is promoting.
Brilliant. Just on the subject of change, we've only got a few minutes left, but I think it'd be wrong of us to talk about the future of pesticides and pesticide policy and practice without acknowledging the impact that a changing climate is going to have in this space. You know, I think we're looking out at the moment, a lot of places are underwater, have been underwater for a long time, or at least very wet. But it was only a couple of years ago things were very, very dry, and I know the warmer, wetter winters in particular are going to have an impact on pest load. And I think we talked about the increase in fungicides. You know, 75% increase in fungicides globally since 1990. In the UK as well, we're seeing that pattern as well, as farmers are kind of looking to deal with the warmer, wetter weather over winter. Sometimes that can play in the opposite direction. I know last year in particular, aphid numbers were very low because I think insect numbers more widely were low after the very, very wet spring. So, have the panel got any views on how a changing climate is going to impact pesticide policy, and whether pesticide policy is prepared for that, is even considering it, or is moving in that direction?
Yeah, I don't think it's prepared for it. I don't think we're prepared for climate change, full stop. What been a sort of worrying messaging that we've heard as well. We need more pesticides to deal with climate change. And again, this is that whole not addressing the underlying problems, not getting ahead of it. I mean, as a species, we're very bad at getting things done in advance. We know it's coming. Where is the action now? So I think, yes, there needs to be concerted effort to look at what the impacts are going to be, and then look at what the sustainable solutions and approaches of those are, rather than just saying, we'll worry about it when it happens, and when it happens, we've got pesticides that we could just dump on and deal with it that way, which I fear is what will happen. But, you know, I mean, we have got time to do this. Again, if we have the political will and the vision and the sense to actually take this forward.
Thanks. Patrick or Denise, did you want to come in on climate change in this issue?
Yeah, I think I said earlier, just farmers have got to be on it. Farmers have got to really hone their skills in how they farm moving into the future. And I think the problems that we're talking about now will be different because things have to change. You know, and if we look at warmer winters and we think, actually, you know what, we can't grow oilseed rape. What are we going to grow instead? We're going to grow sunflowers. That'll bring its own massive problems and different battles to have. You know, so I think as farmers change, I think we're going to continue to have the debate about how do we produce food as cheaply as the public demand it, because ultimately that's the driver. You know, we're going to keep having these conversations until everyone says, well, we're happy to pay twice as much for our food, and I think we know that's probably not coming. Farmers will be reactive. We'll keep doing whatever we need to do to have businesses that are profitable, sustainable. If businesses aren't sustainable, someone else will be doing it. And I think this is just an ongoing battle in terms of pesticide use. But we will continue to use what we're told we can use, and won't use what we can't. And if we can find ways that are more cost effective, then absolutely everyone will be doing that instead.
Yes, I mentioned earlier on about the increase in fluke in our livestock, and that is definitely weather climate related. And flukicides are being used more frequently. But our family, like Patrick's family, we're exploring different options of being able to avoid using these, and fluke included. And this is grazing and it's breeding. And we spend a lot of time looking at the kind of phenotypical traits of our cattle in terms of their best capacity to cope with the changes we know are coming. So it is about exploring and experimenting. And sometimes experiments don't work and there's a cost. But anyway, it's about being open-minded and encouraging other farmers to do the same. Because there are possibilities. And the possibilities are exciting. And sometimes they're fun. And actually what's even better, sometimes they make us money.
Brilliant. I think we're coming up to time now, so I think we had a fantastic conversation this morning. We've talked about a whole range of issues, from supply chains to knowledge sharing, agronomists, climate change, and international policies and how they can interact with UK ones. But just as a final question to the panel, this session has been about policy to practice and what the future holds. So over the next kind of 12 to 18 months, if you had to pick one change in policy, whether that's at England level, UK level, or international level, that you'd like to see, what would that be? I think we have about a minute left, so if you keep it.
Can I have two?
Go on then.
A global ban on paraquat would be number one, including the export and manufacture from this country to other countries, and a target for reducing the use and impact of pesticides in the UK that is promoted and supported by the government. I'd like to see that in the next 18 months.
Sounds like you'd had those prepared, Nick. There you go. Yeah. Patrick?
And give us the advice, the tools, support, and the knowledge to be able to implement that, whatever it is.
And support transition. Funding and policy support and leadership, please.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for coming, both in person and online, and thank you for all the excellent questions. If you could please thank our excellent panel. I think they've been great. And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.